they're really related to us. I do feel like spending some time with John and Andrew, you directly, and kind of talking through it. Okay, we're in a room. Who do you have in mind? If it were up to us, of the 38 people we have between our two teams, if we were to basically set aside everything else that everybody was working on and focus on this.
Yeah.
Here's the 9 or 10 people we would bring to the party that could be full time tomorrow, and then just kind of debate the merits and the position descriptions that we need. That when could we get together and talk about that?
Yeah, I think
talk about and look, if the compensation for management teams is a part and comes after the warrants, we should talk about how you think about that as well, right? As at least the day one 50-50 shareholder. I don't know how you're going to hire people without being able to articulate exactly what's in it for them.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that plan worked out already, I'm just curious how serious any of these conversations that John might have been ready to have are, right? These senior execs are pretty serious, sophisticated folks. They're not going to get, within 10 feet of a situation like this without knowing potentially what's in it for them.
This doesn't have to be a decision tomorrow.
So
tell him he's trying to start.
How does Grafton think about that?
Well,
if you were to look at.
Yeah, I think as discussed, I think that the way it's being looked at is that these people would come on board once there's funding, and then because they won't before that time and won't leave their current posts, and then, as I said, the heavy lifting on all the other projects isn't really till the end of the year, so there is a bunch of time in the Daytona group's mind.
Okay, so just, I guess hypothetically, what is the compensation structure for, if you're hiring 10 people between fourth quarter and first quarter, just how would you think about it?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm just trying to think about how you design a compensation structure. We showed you, ours just, there's the post-flip profit sharing model that most U.S. Power folks use was part of our proposal with some other bells and whistles to entice you guys, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But are we way off? Is this just kind of a salary and a benefits kind of organization for Daytona? How do you think about compensating the management teams that Grafton has backed?
Yeah, I mean,
it
hasn't been a focus at all at this point in the process, and it's something that I know that they certainly do have views on how that works, but it certainly hasn't been tabled.
Yeah, maybe I can just jump in. Sorry guys, this is Ashley with Grafton. I know this has been a conversation that has been brought up at the board and between John and Geeta themselves. I know as far as compensation packages for people that John and Geeta might have in mind, obviously we don't want to incur any kind of additional G&A right now. Grafton has still been doing a lot of the heavy lifting along with Nevada Hydro and pulling additional resources when needed. So this is a conversation I think that needs to be tabled for the appropriate people. I don't think that's necessarily anyone at this table can answer. But I do identify this as one of your key issues on timing, and just kind of going back to that. You've highlighted some due diligence around CEQA, some CalISO issues, obviously focusing on a team and figuring out what additional resources might be needed. I don't know if that's necessarily on day one, but the conversations can start. Is there anything else you guys would need in order to, again, try to meet that target of the 26? Just because, as Matt mentioned a little bit earlier, we do have some groups that are working and operating on that timeline, so we just want to make sure we're at least providing you with everything that you need prior to that. And some of the ideas that have been circulated as far as kind of creating a bit of a calendar list, going day by day, of just making sure we're ticking off every item on your list so that you can come to a decision point quickly.
Yeah, look, we need to spend a little bit more time with John, for sure.
Okay.
He and I were unsuccessful in finding time last week or this week in California to kind of also meet Rex to get comfortable as to.
You guys picked the wrong week. You should have been here for Stampede. We're always happy to have visitors. I mean,
I I know.
And I can say this in front of the Macquarie guys. I mean, Geet and I met you, Sean. We enjoyed our conversation. We enjoyed meeting Jeff. It was perfect time, time spent together, just getting to know each other. We've enjoyed it. I think the best step, if you guys can afford to do this in the next week or so on your calendar, is actually come here. I think we can get a lot more done in a day session. And happy to help.
Just to be blunt, that's our suggestion.
Okay.
And I think we can cover quite a bit of the getting to know, backing a CEO and picking a partner who've been at it for 18 months together is tough. To do via conference call. And
I agree.
We've all been working hard at it.
Yeah.
Look, you guys have a process and maybe decisions to make this week. That good for you if that's the setup. But I do think it would be a half-hearted commitment to you all, even if I were to send a term sheet this week and says yes. If we haven't had that time to just spend with John and get through some of this stuff,
sure.
Then whether we're all at a mutual, let's kind of do this together, then we've got the benefit of having spent time and not just traded an email and having said that. So,
and I agree. This is Stampede Week for us, so just if you can imagine, schedules just get a little bit busy. We could be available as early as next week for you guys. I can help coordinate.
We're just holding out Monday, Tuesday for meetings with for council right now. We just have to check with John what his schedule is, if he's traveling the back half of next week, or if he's going to be here. But I think just on the term sheet, you mentioned the rescue clause. I think it'd be great if you could send us sort of what the language looks like on that.
Yeah, happy to.
Okay.
So help us with. Look, I know the warrants have been a big one, right? So forget the whole Class B, forget the back-ended promote. You guys want warrants, you want your upfront piece. I understand it. There's an issue that gets triggered there with governance, obviously, right? Warrants would be an economic, not a voting interest that couldn't disrupt what is otherwise designed to be a 50-50 partnership, at least in the initial stages till the next round. I want to make sure we're all clear on that, right? The warrants can't, at least in our mind, I want to make sure how you think about them. Warrants, when triggered, an NTP could not or should not. They're economic instruments, not control instruments. And that's a question, not a statement.
Yeah. I mean, as I think we discussed last week, but the NTP decision will be struck by the board, knowing that the warrants will then be exercisable. But the funding needs to be in place to announce NTP anyway, which we'd imagine would have significant dilution, right away, pretty much. So that we could think about that. To affect that the control would be tipped a little bit, so we could think about a control in it. But I just don't see it as being too much of an issue, given the board will have, unanimously made that decision and be aware of the next funding steps, etc. They'll already be in place.
Here's how it matters. If you wind up putting in an intermediate holdco and you're bringing equity in below, and not wanting, but yet the warrants still get triggered, and now you got a 2/3, 1/3 at Daytona, but most of your project equity, to the extent we have collectively gone out and raised it, comes in. We wouldn't want to bring that into our cozy little family. We would bring it in at an intermediate outcome, not at the parent Daytona. It would come in at a project intermediate holdco, but it would still potentially trigger or imbalance, what our relationship would be at the Daytona Leaps One opco. Anyway, I'll think we'll enumerate some of those just down the road issues as we just think about economics versus control. Because again, our bias here is all things being equal, we would fundraise less, we would spend less time on fundraising, more time on funding the business, so that over the next 2 or 3 years, management is advancing as many of these projects as are possible and is spending as little time fundraising as possible. And I know